Morning, folks. I'm Victor Horton from Maine Resource Recovery, working with Mark King of the Maine DP and Ash Van Norwick to help set up the Maine Master Compost Community Compost course. So today we have about 20 to 30 folks here. And if you could just save your questions, maybe you could put them in the chat. And then after Mark's done the talk, we'll go through them and get those answered for you. So Mark's the ultimate authority in composting. Find a teacher you won't find. Working with a DP for over 30 years. And sorry about that. I got to move my picture. Just want to. FRC is a group of like-minded individuals. Our goal is to minimize wasted food. And this course hopefully will help you capture that from the landfill and other places where it shouldn't be. How you get involved? Reach out to Ash, our intern. She'll see if we can get you on the listserv, and then help share the word with any of your other community folks, food pantries, if you have farmers or other folks like that that might benefit from saving some food that might end up in the trash. We want to hear from them. And I'll just tell you a little bit about the certificate. By taking this and getting certified, it'll serve as a demonstration of your technical ability, which is required when applying for a permit by rule for the Maine DP to set up a site. You'll still work with your DP in setting up the area, but it'll be easier. And this will get you started so you can work with your rep later on if you want to add other items that are not covered by the PBR. That's not peanut butter. So individuals competing all 5 webinars will be eligible to take the 50-question certification exam. You get a 70% pass, and then you may be certified if you'd like to. There is a cost to that, but the webinars, they're all free. You watch all 5 of them 100 times if you want for free. And these are the prices for students and all others. And if you have a couple of folks with your organization, we'll knock $25 off and you'll get the certification for $75. And then we have a toolkit. We haven't quite figured out everything that's going in it, but you'll get that too. So just a little bit about the second webinar. We're going to do compost feedstock and the recipe. That'll be on February 26th. And then the third one, the methods and systems, on March 26th. And like I said to a bunch of folks in the emails, on our website, mrra.net, we're going to have the links loaded up, after we do the classes. So you'll be able to go and bone up on the class if you want to take your test. And the fourth one, we're going to hold that at the Samoset in Rockport, but don't worry if you can't come, because we're going to broadcast live from that event. So that should be fun. And the fifth and final video, we'll do a series of recordings where Mark, Ash, and I will go out and view a few compost sites, look for some of the feedstock assessments, what's in the recipe, look at the pile, do a little troubleshooting, and management of the process. So it'll give you a good hands-on. We just didn't know if we could get everyone to be able to go to the same place, depending on how far you're going. So we thought it'd be better to have a video for you. So like I said, these are free. They're going to be on our YouTube channel once we're done with that link to mra.net, and watch them as many times as you like. Here's just a couple of pictures. The one in the middle here, you probably can't see my mouse, but that is the sticker. We're developing a program if you want to do like a pilot project while supplies last. We'll have some carts we can let you use for food waste and stuff, and they'll be stickered so folks will know what to put in them. Maine's food's too good to waste. And like I said, Mark King works at the Maine DP as the organics management specialist and the Division of Materials Management. And this is how you get a hold of Mark later on. And you can ask me anytime. If you lose his contact, I can get it for you. And with that, I'll turn the class over to Mark. If I can figure out how to stop sharing, we'll be all set and he can take over.
All right, great. Thanks, Vic. I'll get my share started. For those of you in the room or actually online, the reason why we started this program was to try and develop some infrastructure due to a bill that was passed last year, LD 1065, which is going to start ramping us up towards removing food scraps from the landfill. And the first year of implementation is 2030. So the department is trying to build up as much infrastructure as we can. So there'll be lots of options available for generators to bring their food scraps to. And the first way to start that is to do some very simple backyard composting. And I thought that because I'm the only one for the whole state of Maine that does this, if I developed a train the trainer program and got other people trained up, they then could help their communities and other communities develop programs. And with this certification, if you choose to do that, when a community comes into the department, if you're working with them and you have the certification, they will not have to prove technical ability. It'll be taken care of with that certificate. So it's a really good way to kind of help your communities get to the next level without having to worry about a lot of difficult regulatory things. So let's go ahead and move forward here. Did everybody see this okay, Vic?
Yeah, I have it on my
Okay.
screen, so hopefully everyone's logged in.
All right, cool. So this by no means replaces the main compost school, but this is a small slice of programs that will help you develop a community compost operation. If you wish to do something on a more broader scale, then I would suggest you look at the main compost school because that's another great program that we run. So I want to start out with some common compost myths that we can just get off the table right now. The first thing is all composts are created equal. And we know that not to be true. We know for a fact that there are some composts that are usable when they're done 4 weeks of composting. For example, on farm sites for corn ground and hay ground, a 4-week-old compost is great because there's still a lot of dissolved nutrients that are readily available. Whereas in a greenhouse where you're trying to grow perennials or things for sale in the spring, you want a much more mature compost that may take 6 months to finish. So they are, in fact, not all created equal. The second thing is that compost stinks. Everybody believes that that's going to be the problem, that their compost is going to smell. And the answer is it will stink if you don't follow all the correct things we talk about today. But the key is that if you follow a correct process and make sure everything is balanced, you're not going to have odor problems like others would. So the answer is it can stink if managed poorly. Old manure is compost. This is a good one. At the University of Maine at Farmington, we have a compost site in the town where we compost food scraps from the cafeteria and horse manure from the racetrack. Well, we often run out of the food compost because it's so popular, but we have a huge pile of manure that we turn almost every week during the compost process that never gets used. And people buy that like crazy because we've taken manure, turned it, and brought it into a compost value. So old manure in a pile is not compost, but composted manure is compost. So managing it, you can turn it into a compost product. All compost meets organic standards. Organic standards are very strict, and a lot of material will never make it. Leaf and yard compost won't because of the potential for contamination, plastics, things like that. Organic standards are very, very specific. Anything we do with mortalities definitely can be challenging to the organic standards. So the answer is all compost is organic, but the organic standards specify a specific type of compost. And you can definitely meet that with composting, but it doesn't mean that once you finish composting, your material is organically certified. Compost is never a fertilizer. That's the most important thing from today's talk. Compost is a soil conditioner. When we add compost to our soil, it brings so many great values. Water holding capability, it holds on to nutrients. So if you fertilize, the fertilizer doesn't wash down through the soil quickly. It stays in the compost and becomes more valuable for the plants as they're growing. But it is definitely not a fertilizer. It is a soil conditioner or a soil amendment, and that's its best possible use. It's okay. It's not okay to use compost in potted plants. We've already talked about that. If it's mature and meets all the standards, it has low salt and other things, which we'll talk about later today, then it's totally fine for greenhouse use. But fresh compost that's still hot, if you put that in a greenhouse, you're going to basically kill everything you're planting. So definitely it has to be properly managed. This one's another misnomer. There are many people that think if I add a little compost, then a lot is good. And the answer is 25% of the mix is the best. Anything more is a waste of compost. And if you add Anything above 70%, your plants aren't going to grow because the compost isn't providing all the things that a native soil does. But when added at about 25%, it enhances the native soil, makes it even better. So composting, what is it? Well, it's a biological process that takes things that were once alive and transforms them into a soil nutrient additive that is great for making the soil structure better and making crops more easily grown. But basically, you just take a series of compounds, all organic, blend them together, and then you have air, water, and you have a beautiful combination. So when we talk about the decomposition process, we have various stages we go through. The very first is rotting. We do that a lot. I mean, for example, when you have an animal die or things like that, let's say that you're on a farm, a lot of the old processes used to be taking them out to the woods and just letting them kind of decay, and then maybe the coyotes get them. So that's rotting. Rotting is where you just let things happen naturally. It's often very smelly. It goes anaerobic with no oxygen, can be real problematic. As we start to add these materials to a compost process, we develop a thing called humification, which is where the microbes and other organisms in the compost actually break those components down and then form new compounds which are more resistant to breakdown. And one of those compounds is humus. And we use humic and fulvic acids to make it happen. It's a really great thing. So as it does that, a lot of these nutrients are mobilized. But once the compost is added to the soil and the soil microbes start to work on it, they then mineralize these compounds and then they're available for plants to grow. So it's just a natural process that we follow down through. This just shows all the critters involved in the compost process, from the really large arthropods and nematodes and worms down to the fungi, which break down lignin. They're very good for wood. If you ever see wood in the woods and there's all kinds of fungus all over it, the reason why is that they're working on those lignin compounds and breaking them down. Once they do, then the smaller microorganisms can feed on them and make the compost process work. So all these organisms are involved in some part, some at the very beginning, some at the very end, but the end result is they work collaboratively. So the ones that work, as I said, the fungi primarily decompose woody compounds. The bacteria are the decomposers of the high nitrogen materials, such as the greens. So things like grass and food scraps and seafood, things like that. Actinomycetes are really kind of a cool organism. They are basically an intermediary between bacteria and fungi. They tend to be in a compost pile when it's especially first starting, and it's between the really hot aerobic 1 foot layer in to the 3 foot layer in, which is the active compost, but not as hot as the outside that's getting a lot of oxygen. So they'll form a line across that zone, and they move like fungi with little hyphae fingers, but they're more of a bacteria. And then the macroscopic organisms, as I mentioned, are the ones that are responsible for the primary breakdown in the smaller particles. This is an example of the actinomycetes right here. So if I'm looking at this compost pile and I take a shovel and dig straight down the front of it, this area above, all this up here where it says active compost, that's 1 foot into the pile. Below this layer of actinomycetes is not inactive as much as it's very wet and it's still growing, but it's somewhat inactive in that most of the activity occurs on the outer foot layer. So these actinomycetes are very important in the very beginning to let us know that our pile is actively working well. So that's what they do, is that they're a zone between the superactive and the not so active compost. So all these factors to a certain extent help impact how microbes work in a pile. We're going to talk about these, but the C-N ratio is the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Oxygen is really important. If the pile is not oxygen rich, then it's going to smell, because anaerobic produces lots of odors. The moisture content is important because that's where the microbes live. And then the temperature, to me, is not as important a finding as it represents how happy the pile is. And I'll explain that in a minute. And then finally, particle size, really important at the beginning to make sure your pile works well. So seed-end ratio is basically the supply of total carbon compared to the total nitrogen in a compost feedstock. If that seed-end ratio is too high, meaning too much carbon, the process slows right down because the microbes feed on carbon, but they need nitrogen in order to make more microbes. So what'll happen is if you're carbon rich, you'll have only so much microbial activity and then it'll slow right down because there's no way to replicate themselves. Whereas if it's too low, you're more likely to lose nitrogen as ammonia because there's not enough carbon to match up with it for the microbes to feed on. So we like to have a balance that's roughly 20 to 30 to 1 carbon to 1 part nitrogen. And that's kind of the balance that we try to achieve, but we do so on a volumetric scale. And we'll talk about the difference between those two in a minute. So some common feedstocks that we see, carbon. I want to tell you that shredded paper is one that we don't say no on, but when we promote backyard composting and community composting, I tend to steer people away from it because number one, it doesn't have any structure. So when it gets wet, it flattens out just like a pancake. Also, it has lots of potential for additives like PFAS compounds, heavy metals, and things that we just aren't aware of. So we try to steer people away, but a lot of schools want to do it as an exercise for their students to see composting work. So we have very limited places where we actually recommend it. The bottom line is that it's better to keep it out. Same with leaves. Leaves are a really great thing to have around, but the problem with leaves is when they get wet, they get very compact. However, if leaves are mixed with grass clippings and then the pile is made hot, then we're in business. And I'll give you an example. I had a big seal die off in 2018, and we had 1,000 seals die along the coast of Maine. Down there, there's not a lot of compost operations except for leaf and yard. And I didn't have much carbon to play with, so I got in touch with all the public works directors, and we started composting seals at their transfer stations where they had leaf and yard piles. We picked a very hot pile that had leaves and grass in it, dropped in the seals, and within 6 weeks, all that was left was bones. So it is definitely something that can work really well as long as it's a good combination. Same with newsprint. I put it in the same as shredded paper. You got old hay. Old hay is great, except for the problem that the strands are really hard for the microbes to break down. But if you put it in a hay buster and chop it up, then they do really well. So size reduction is super important. Horse bedding is by far my absolute favorite for the state of Maine. It does awesome. And then you've got straw and wood chips. Wood chips are great if they're less than 2 inches. If they're bigger than 2 inches, I put them at the base of the pile for aeration. But if they're bigger than 2 inches and you put them in a compost pile, you really ought to screen them out because they're going to take a while to break down. As far as nitrogen goes, I have food scraps. I have a pre and post on here for a specific reason. Pre-consumer vegetable scraps, things like that, don't have a lot of nitrogen, and often you have to add a nitrogen source with them. Post-consumer tends to have more nitrogen because there's lots of things like fish and meat and things that are mixed in that give it that juice. Another great source for community composting is grass clippings when blended with leaves, as I said, and then any manure, especially manure that's bedded, because then you have the benefit of that extra carbon for moisture absorption and to help feed the microbes. So here we go. As I said, this is some common carbon feedstocks. You got leaves, wood shavings. Cardboard is another caution, especially wax coated, because wax coated cardboard sheds water. But cardboard in general, if it's not ground up, it does not absorb well and it doesn't compost well. And I'll say the same with the shredded newspaper, not a lot of structure. So I like wood chips, especially small ones. Out west, I've used corn stalks for HP, the avian influenza composting and poultry, because that's what they have. And straw, once again, if it's chopped up. So size reduction is really important for carbon. Nitrogen tend to be those materials that are very low in the seed-end ratio. A lot of the animal manures, especially chicken manure, that's a seed-end ratio of about 4 to 1. Food waste, food scraps, you're going to find that they can vary depending upon the composition. Lawn clippings, once again, you want to make sure they don't come from a site that's been sprayed with herbicides, because we're finding that herbicides will not break down in the compost process, and your compost can be herbicidal if you use it. Fish and garden clippings, once again, the garden clippings, if they've been sprayed with anything, should have a caution. So the organisms need a balanced diet, and we've been telling people for years that the safest way to go, if you don't really know a recipe, is to take 3 parts carbon and add it to 1 part of your material, your nitrogen that you're trying to get rid of, if it's really wet. If it's not so wet, let's say it's like you're dealing with some meat that was cooked, but you just can't do anything with it, then you might go with a 2-to-1 ratio. The idea is that the more carbon is necessary to absorb the liquid, because the 100% of the odor of any pile is in the liquid. If you can tie that liquid up, you're going to take away the odor as well. So it's a really critical thing. This just shows you some C-Den ratios. So if I start out with a C-Den ratio of 60-to-1, really high in carbon, you're going to see that I don't get a really good temperature profile. I'm not getting up into those 120, 130 temps that I want for good active composting. And once again, the temperature has nothing to do with the compost. It has everything to do with how well the microbes are working. And therefore, a temperature of 140 lets me know that I've got lots of microbes and they're feeding on and breaking down the material and creating more complex compost. When I have a low temperature profile like this, I'm really concerned that I haven't made much good compost. Now you look at a ratio of 30-to-1, you can hit 160. I actually did some deer up at Waste Management a couple of years back that I did in a container. I got 170 for 2 weeks, and they broke down super well. So that told me that I had a really happy recipe. Oxygen, very, very important. The pile needs, it takes in 21%, but it only needs 5 to operate. 5 to 10 is optimal. If you think about us, when we breathe in 21%, we give off 16. We only need 5% in our bodies from metabolism as well. That's why when we give somebody CPR, we don't kill them when we breathe in their mouth, because we're actually giving them 16% oxygen and they only need 5. So every time they exhale, they're exhaling the other 11%. But if a pile does not have enough oxygen, then you end up producing volatile organic acids. Volatile organic acids are basically the product of fermentation, like methane, propionic, and some of these others that are very smelly. And as a result, if you're composting and your pile really stinks, I can honestly tell you when I come to visit that your pile does not have enough absorption of the liquid and the oxygen is being inhibited. And the simple solution is to give it a turn. And usually that solves the problem. So keeping that moisture level under control, keep it 55%, but keep it well maintained is really good for the aerobic process. This just shows if you're teaching people how to do a backyard pile, there are some ways to ventilate your pile. You can put in twigs and create holes. You can add perforated pipe. You can add the tile drainage pipe over here, the traditional black tubing. Or very simply, you can build it with a structure that allows air to flow in. And we're going to talk a little bit about that system when we go over systems later on. So we talked about that. So this is really cool. This gives you an idea. When we talk about how a pile works, it breathes from the side, it goes into the center, and it exhales out the chimney. Okay. What you're going to see here is a pile of chickens. This was back when we thought we were going to get avian influenza in 2006. And we actually composted 600 birds in here. Okay. And you can see the little beaks and things right there. But what is important is if you notice on the side, you see these white areas. That is not ash. What that is the pile was drawing in so much air that it literally dried out the sides. And that shows you a very exciting compost. And this was a biosolids compost, which regrettably you can't use anymore in Maine. It's been banned. But this was used for mortality management. And this pile dissolved those chickens in less than 3 weeks. So it just shows you a good hot active pile can really go crazy. So the compost process, here we go. We start out at the very beginning and we quickly go to what's called the active phase. So we start out at a temperature of ambient. Let's say the ambient temperature is 60. Within 72 hours, you should start seeing temperatures in excess of 130 degrees. That's your first clue your pile is doing well. Now, it won't stay that way for, 3-4 weeks. It needs, after about a week or so, to be turned to keep that momentum going. So we periodically turn our piles to take the inside and put it to the outside and the outside to the inside and provide the microbes with more feed, more places to move to, and more oxygen. So turning is very important. But the active phase lasts anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. Then we go into an extended curing phase. Now, the curing phase can be 1 day if you want to just use it on fields, or it can be 6 months if you want to use it in greenhouses. So it depends on the use, on how long you cure it. But the curing phase is where the pile is left alone and maybe turned once every couple of weeks to naturally finish itself out. Temperature. As I said, temperature is a great indicator of how happy your pile is. So the one tool that I tell everyone they need to buy is a good 3-foot thermometer. The reason why is that we want you to take temperatures at the 1 foot and then at the 3-foot layer of your pile every single day. The reason why we do that, the 1 foot is the hot active area. And that tells us that the pile is doing super well. The inside is still going. It's still starting to grow. And what'll happen is after like the first week or so, the outside temperature will start to decline. And that is your pile telling you that it needs to be turned. What we find is that after that first week, we then can look at the thermometer readings for the 1 foot and 3 foot, and whatever they exceed 20 degrees Fahrenheit difference, then the pile is telling you that it needs to be turned as well. So we start using the temperature difference as an indication of the next time the pile needs to be turned. So daily temperature is super important. And it's something that I recommend everybody does. Water. This is super important. People will try to sell you all these probes that look at the percent moisture because you want 55. But there's a simple test. It's called the squeeze test. You reach into the compost pile, grab a handful, give it a good hard squeeze. If water shoots out your knuckles, it is too wet. If you open your hand and it crumbles to the ground, it's too dry. But if you open your hand and it feels moist and creates a ball, that is 55% moisture. So you got to trust the senses you were born with. All this extra equipment is just superfluous, and I just don't feel that it's necessary. Particle size. This is a really good one because the smaller the particle size, the greater the surface area, the quicker the microbes can feed on it. That's a cool thing. However, if the particle size is too small, then it can actually, when it gets wet, become a blockage to oxygen flow in the pile. So there is a too small. Simultaneously, there's a too big. If you have a really large particle, there's no surface area for the microbes to feed on. And when you have it in a pile, air is going to blow right through it because it creates so many air spaces that it'll dry out the moisture and it can really kill your pile activity. So too large particles can definitely be a hindrance as well, because we want that pore space, but we want the pore space to be small enough that air can flow in, but water isn't lost. So we're looking for that. So this is an example of someone that wants to compost, and they would use this material as their major feedstock. That's not going to work. What's going to happen is you're going to get some composting activity on the finer pieces, but the rest is just not going to break down. And at the end of the compost process, you're going to have a lot of brush, and it's going to dry out very quickly. This is an example of what you're hoping for. It's got a mixture of fines and a mixture of coarse. This is going to make a nice pile. Air is going to flow through well, and it's going to absorb moisture. So you're not going to have odors, and the nutrients that are in that moisture are going to stay available for the microbes instead of being lost out the bottom of the pile as leachate. And that's important because when you lose leachate from your compost pile, aside from making your regulator unhappy, you're taking nutrients that belong in your compost and you're letting them go away. So you're devaluing your compost product. So super important. This is a very old picture, but it shows how a compost pile works at the microscopic level. This is a particle of food or a particle of carbon. This is the moisture film that combines between the two. This is airflow, and the microbes live where all these things come together. So it is essential to have the right moisture, the right airflow, and the right particle sizes to guarantee success in your compost. So the optimal ratios that this is the mantra that we use: seed-end ratio of 20 to 30 to 1, a percent moisture of 50 to 65%, an oxygen content of 5 to 10%, a pH of 5 to 8.2 is considered acceptable. I'll say one quick thing about pH. I do not worry about it in the compost pile. My experience over the last 35 years is that a pile will buffer itself. I have started out with recipes that have a very, very low pH, and sometimes I have to add something high pH to it. For example, if I have apple pumice. Apple pumice comes from the cider pressing process. It has a pH of about 4.5. Pretty nasty to deal with. However, if I blend in a little bit of wood ash, I can drive that pH up to 6.8, and then it's more compatible with the compost process. So that's one way to do it. Conversely, if I have something that's got a really high pH, I can go to the ag supply store and get what they call elemental sulfur and add that, and that brings the pH down. But the one thing you got to remember is with pH adjustment, it's like putting pepper on your mashed potatoes. A little bit goes a very long way. So you want to experiment with a little bit each time. Particle size, 1/4 to 3 inches. 3 inches the max in an initial recipe, unless you have a way to screen stuff out, because some people add the wood chips for bulking for airflow, which is a good thing, but they recover them at the end of the process and recycle them. And then the temperature range with really good active composting is around 110 to 160. So some of the super important take-home messages that I wanted people to get a good feel for is compost is a biological process. Therefore, you've got to treat it like it's alive. And if it needs things like moisture, you need to add moisture. If it needs more oxygen, you've got to turn the pile. And most of the problems that can occur can be fixed with just turning the pile. It's as simple as that. It is definitely both an art and a science. And that's a really reason why I've stayed in this job so long, is I learn something new every day about composting from all the different crazy things I've composted in the past. And then the big take-home message is that it is a soil amendment, not a fertilizer, and it should be treated as such. And it's really super important. And I hope that from these lessons going forward, that you guys take a look at this and get what you need from it, but decide that you want to become a champion for composting in your community, because that's what we need right now. Maine was based on lots of communities working together, and that's the way that it should be. And I'm really hopeful that all these small communities will get a champion out of these programs that will help start small infrastructure, which will together make big infrastructure. And then if you need any more information, there is a book out. If you come to the Maine Compost School, we'll actually give you a free one, but it's about $125, but it is the Bible on composting. It is called the Composting Handbook. All my information is available. I want you to know that when you finish this program, become certified, I still will help you on anything you're doing. My job is to cover the whole state of Maine. So this is a way for me to get lots of projects going all over the place, but I will make sure as a steward that those projects go forward and are successful. Let's see, the Compost School webpage. I do have a lot of information that's available for free. So if you go on that site, composting.org, you can get all the cool free information. Maine Resource Recovery Association, we're going to do this program, and then I'm going to shoot forward with how to conduct a waste audit and get people sort of certified in that as well, because that way you can help businesses figure out where they're can save money and save food so it doesn't get wasted, which is a really good thing. And also, you have other state agencies. You've got your USDA, you've got Maine DACF. So if you have any farmers that are interested in possibly composting, you could start a project with them, and then that can be a community-based compost project. And they can get what's called a compost management plan. And a compost management plan allows an exemption of 60 cubic yards of solid waste material per month without requiring a DEP permit. And I actually help DACF, the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, write those plans. So it's just another nice way to help a farmer who maybe is not doing so super well, gain a little extra money and produce some compost and divert some food away from the landfill. So it becomes really cool. And I'll end with this neat story. In 2000, I was quite a young pup, but our compost team went to Australia. We were invited to deliver our compost school program at the end of the 2000 Down Under conference. And upon arrival, I was walking up to customs, and this beagle came over and started sniffing me. And I looked at the handler and I said, geez, I'm from the state of Maine. I'm here to help teach composting. I don't have any drugs on me. And he said, I'm not worried about drugs. What do you have for food? And I went, what? This is an agricultural dog. He's looking for food. And I happened to have some crackers and some other things in my bag. And I had to throw them all out. And the reason why is because their flora and fauna of Australia are very precious to them. So they actually do not want any importation of any food, even packaged, for the potential of causing any disease that could affect their animals. So I thought that was pretty super cool. All right, with that, Vic, I think I'm ready for questions. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, I don't see any in the chat, so if people would rather just raise their hand, or if there are no questions yet, we'll do it next time. Let me make this bigger,
Right,
see if there's any hands here.
Stop sharing. So,
Okay,
go ahead. James, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I've been working with composting a long time, and two things that come up. First would be seaweed.
Yes, it can be done.
How do you manage? Because it is very wet, and I worry about the amount of salt that may be in it.
Well, I treat seaweed like I do a carcass, and I've composted every carcass you can think of, from whales to emus. Okay. But what I do is I get a pile going on its own. So the key is a hot biologically active pile is a critical thing. So let's say you get leaf and yard going, you get it cooking. Then I break into the pile and I add the seaweed in a layer and close it. And I let the natural pile dynamics start working on it, because there's a lot of nitrogen. Depending upon the amount, you might want to spray it with a hose and rinse off some salt, because salt can definitely not be a non-friendly thing to compost. But you get it in there and you get it cooking, and it'll actually break all that stuff down. And there's a lot of really good compounds in seaweed that make it a better compost. So definitely.
And then my other part, which comes from experience, because we just transfer crab waste right now to a chickadee compost, a commercial operation in Surrey, which has worked out pretty well. But somebody with best of intentions one day stuffed a bunch of bittersweet vines into one of the crab waste barrels, and it was ripe with seeds. And I'm just the general question about what you do with invasives in a community environment where people are trying to get rid of stuff like that.
So this is one where you talk to your transfer station person, which would be Dominique. And if you have a burn pile, it's really recommended. That's one way to go. I've had towns actually bury that stuff, but you don't want it to propagate and make more. So the other thing that people do, that we used to do before we developed protocols for composting marijuana, is wrap it in a black plastic bag, seal it tight, and leave it on the asphalt in the hot sun. And it will kill that stuff off, and then just toss it in the trash. So those are just some ideas, but you've got to do whatever your transfer station operator person tells you to do. I've not had success with composting those kinds of invasives. I have had success with composting milfoil from lakes. Once again, I treat that like seaweed and carcasses. I place it in the belly of a hot active pile, and I've broken it down and had it not propagate when wet. So that's the key. But invasives are tough. They really are.
Good. Any other questions? All right, well, I've shared my screen for a minute. I just wanted to show you the MRA website, put in a plug for the conference coming up in April. But if you're looking in a few days, down below here, there's the Food Recovery Council. You click on that. It's still being built. Well, it was built more than this. Okay, and then there's our little flyer. And somewhere along here, you're going to find those links to these classes once we get them uploaded. So just go to the mra.net and look around, and then you'll be able to find those.
So a little bit about the program, just from my perspective, I told you what my goals were. I'm trying to build community infrastructure and all of that, but we want to give you tools to be successful. So what we're going to do is we're going to put together an educational packet for you that will include community surveys, all the things you need to get your community fired up or a community you want to work with. My goal is that those that get certified don't just stick in their own community, but travel around and try to get momentum and buzz going. And so what this certificate does is gives you the ability to tell whatever town you're working with or entity that if they apply for a permit, you are their technical ability. So that is a really important piece because that means they then can get that permit and then we'll come in and help them from there. So in other words, you're there every part of the way and we're there to help support you. So it's really, it's a neat idea. I'm trying to see how it works. I did actually give workshops in Wyoming, very similar to this. They're starting their own program. I did give a keynote address in Michigan at a conference last year, and they've started a master composter program as well. So I just think the time is right. So that's kind of my whole thought process. And so we're going to try to make this as easy as possible for folks that want to get certified and people that just want a little bit of education. That'll be available too.
Excellent.
So,
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I thank you all for attending. And
it looks like there are a couple
of
questions in the chat. I just want to point
cool.
out.
Okay. Yep. Go for it.
Oh, yeah. There we go. All right. So where are these questions? First one, how long after compost is added to native soil before it's broken down by the biology and converted to soil?
Okay. Awesome question. I will tell you that I can sell ice cubes to Eskimos, but when I have our sales, and the Farmington project, by the way, the one at University of Maine at Farmington is near and dear to my heart because I graduated from there in 1986. And so I got a chance to start that program in 2004 with a guy by the name of Ron Slater. And that he ran that program up until his untimely death. And then Tom Easler came. And so right now I'm working with the school to help keep it afloat. But the bottom line is that we tell people that you're going to get at least 2 years worth of bang out of each compost that you apply, because it's like putting money in the ATM and then taking it out. You don't put 500 in and take 500 out. You take out a little bit here, a little bit there. And that's what happens as the microbes are mineralizing the compost. So they'll usually get a good nutrient burst for 2 years after application. It's a steady kind of breakdown.
Excellent. I have another question. Well, I have two now. Do you have experience in large-scale in-vessel composting design?
Yes, I sure do. And I will tell you that with most of these systems, they are getting more and more perfected, but they're getting more and more complicated as well. If you have a specific kind of design in mind, I'd recommend that you kind of shoot me an email. We can talk about it. But I've seen probably the most popular design for in-vessel is the rotating drum. And the reason why people like it is because you can do it either simply as a batch or you can do it as a continuous flow where you add a little bit each day. And the idea is that the drum rotates and does most of the odor control over the first couple of weeks of composting through that process. And so it's a neat thing. But what they don't tell you is that when that material comes out of the drum, it's not compost. It's actually just well mixed and super aggressive, and it still needs to be cured. And what they have is an aerated bed where they blow air through it. But the idea is that it's an extended curing period before it can be used. But yes, there are lots of cool systems out there. But really, my recommendation is that if you want to do an in-vessel system, do a lot of reading, get a lot of education.
I'll just add for Mark that we do talk, or I don't talk. He talks about it in one of the sessions that we're going to be putting on. A little bit more about in-vessel, show you some photos and such. Mark, another question.
Yeah.
Do you have experiment in bokashi composting?
Yeah, I'm not super fan of it. And the reason why is because I think that sometimes it's promoted through greenwashing. The problem with bokashi is it's fermentation. And what happens is that when you take that stuff outside and you work it in the soil, if you don't work it deep in the soil, it smells. It becomes very active because when you ferment something, you're oxygen starving it. So you go to what are called anaerobic and facultative anaerobic bacteria that can work in low oxygen conditions. But as a result, they produce all these volatile organic acids. Now people are like, oh, if my pile goes anaerobic, then I'm done, right? And the answer is no, because as soon as you turn that and make it oxygen rich again, the microbes grab those volatile organic acids and they consume them because they're a wicked, excellent energy source. So I don't want to make it so simple that everything in life can be fixed with a compost turn. But honestly, 90% of the major problems, if you turn your compost, you're going to take care of them. So bokashi is just not high on my hit list. If people want to try it and if schools want to do it for education, I'm all over that. That's cool. But if someone wants to drive a whole process based on it, I'm just not a big fan.
Cool. Any more questions? I don't see any hands. Azalea, do you see any? Okay, I wanted to just introduce you to Ash. Ash, if you're listening, if you could just pop on real quick and introduce our intern. She's been working with the Food Recovery Council, and she's probably going to be the one that'll be talking to you folks about joining some of those groups, but I'm not sure where she is.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool.
Hey, we can hear you.
Yeah,
She's awesome.
Yeah, I'm Ash. I'm a Food Recovery Council intern. I want to thank you all for coming to the first seminar. It's the first of 5. I want to take a moment to remind you all of the Food Recovery Council. And our goal is to minimize wasted food by creating a book in which those with wasted food can communicate with those interested. For anyone interested in joining the FRC and not currently on my list, take a moment to email me after the meeting and I can get you signed up. Put you on our listserv so you can communicate with everyone in the group so far. Our next seminar is going to be at the same time next month. So it's going to be on February 26th at 10 a.m. and it's going to be focused on compost feedstocks. I think that's everything I wanted to say.
Cool. And just so you know, the reason why I'm breaking these down the way that I am, the biology starts us out. The feedstocks tell us what challenges are associated with these when we put them into composting. Then pile building and setting your system up will be the last one. In between is going to be compost methods and systems. And I'll describe from the very basic all the way up to the complex systems. There'll be a lot of in-vessel there as well. So those of you that are interested in different systems, what's out there, I'll talk about them all and how they work and how they benefit. But I will tell you that the simple system of a transfer station with a pile of leaves and grass, throwing food in there is probably the easiest and best way to reduce food scraps in your community, because every transfer station's got a front end loader and a place to put a pile of leaves and grass. And if you find a way to collect your food scraps from your citizens, put them into your pile, you've now got a value added product. So we're going to talk about how to do that and how simple it is. And really, honestly, if you currently have a transfer station, you would get a permit by rule. And a permit by rule is a very simple permit. You apply for it And if you don't hear back from the DEP in 15 working days, then it's automatically guaranteed and granted as a permit. And that one requires technical ability, which the certificate of technical ability from this class will satisfy. So we'll talk more about that as we progress.
Just
I will
got a
ask
couple more questions for you, Mark.
Oh, good. Awesome.
All right. We have one. Are there any lesson plans available or resources for elementary age students?
So if you go to my website, composting.org, and you look at teachers' resources, there's a whole bunch that you can have for free.
Cool. And then one more here. Is there a benefit of using the Johnson-Su bioreactor compared to a pile of material?
That's a system that I'm not familiar with, but when I hear the word bioreactor, I'm wondering if it's similar to the one that they're using down, or they're going to be using at Biddeford. We just gave them a grant through the waste diversion grant process to put in a biodigester. It's called a rocket digester, and it's going to be just for their campus because they lost their pig farmer who used to take all their material. And actually, Vic, let me just mention that really quick. I'll mention at the end of each of these. The department operates a waste diversion grant program, and we give basically up to $25,000 per proposal. Your proposal is weighed amongst all the others. Each one is treated individually, but then we grade them. And the ones that score the highest, we give money to until we run out of money. And so with that being said, I have applied for the next one, and I'm hoping to release it sometime within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And it's going to be a longer process this time because the procurement division has created a new system of applying for the grant where you have to be registered as a vendor for the state of Maine. So I'm going to give people a little extra time to figure that process out and get registered. We're not doing it, the state procurement is. But I want to give people a chance to figure that process out. So I'm going to, instead of a 30-day turnaround, I'm going to make it 45 days. It's a
Great.
really simple process. And, if you need help, Vic at MRRA can help you. I know Olivia Kunish can help you from KVCOG, and I believe Catherine Oak also has agreed from AVCOG to assist people in developing these plans. So I encourage you to reach out. The problem is that when I issue an RFP, I can no longer talk to people because I'm the RFP coordinator for the state. So if you call me or send me a message, I have to tell you, I can't talk to you. It's very frustrating. Although you can ask me questions in writing on the vendor website for the first couple of weeks of the application process. Then at that point, after I've answered those questions on the website, then I can't speak with you again until after I issue awards. It's a tough process for me because I'm a very people-y person, but I understand the process.
I was thinking just the opposite. How do I get in on that plan where I don't have to talk to certain people? Anyway, I just put up Mark's contact info again on the screen. If you have questions that come up after this talk, you feel free to shoot him a message. And if it's something that the whole group should hear, we'll probably just touch on it next time. Thanks
Cool.
everyone for coming. Like I said, in a couple of days, we should have that link uploaded, and that's all I got.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Great
Thanks so
day.
much.